from the public to the elected leaders, they need to educate the elected leaders on what their concerns are. And the elected leaders sometimes need to have that same conversation back.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the 435 podcast. Based on popular demand, we're covering the Washington City election. And today I had Troy Belliston on. Thanks for being on, man. This was a great conversation. We talked conflict of interest. We talked about water, economic development, all things going on in Washington City, his track record, and why he thinks he's a great candidate for Washington City. So November 21st, get out the vote. Your ballots are in the mail right now. Troy Belliston wants you to vote for him. He's a great option. He's a good candidate. He's served on city council in the past, but get out the vote November 21st. And you're probably wondering, why does Rob not have a beard? He just has a mustache. And the reason is November is Diabetes Awareness Month. If you don't know, my son is 7 years old, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 4. We have a great Diabetic Youth Association here in Southern Utah. I want you to educate yourself on type 1 diabetes, the fascinating story around insulin and how it's become a horrible example of the pharmaceutical industry. But I shaved my beard to raise awareness for type 1 diabetes, especially with the youth. So if you want more information about that, stay tuned for more. We'll be giving you links and things like that along the throughout the whole month. But thanks for tuning in. Enjoy the episode. We'll see you out there.
Hey everyone, the St. George election this year is incredibly important. Go to votestg.com to see who's running and what they stand for, or visit us at our voter booth at Digby's Market, Red Rock Bicycles, or down in the park.
We interviewed 12 of the St. George City Council people.
Wow. Okay.
So I put it on a website. I built a website called votestg.com, and it's a one-stop shop for all the candidates in St. George. I didn't anticipate that they were going to have 18 that signed up for it. And then I start building out the profiles. So you could just go to the website. You have the city. They have the profiles. I just, based off them filling out a survey questionnaire, I put them in order based off who filled out the questionnaire first. I asked them 7 questions. And then we did an interview with them, and then we posted the video on there. So, like, if you're a voter, you could just go to that one place. You see all the candidates. You have the links to all their websites, their social media pages, so you could do like research on them, because there's no one place. Like, looking for just the list of the candidates for Washington City, and this is something I've been doing, like really paying attention to for the last 6 months to a year, and it was tough to find the dang list.
Oh yeah.
I had to go to like 5 different places. It's like, normally it's here. Oh, it's not there. Let me go over here. Here's the, and then I finally, found the link.
Yeah. I mean, obviously Washington City didn't have a primary, right? So, yeah. And we didn't have the interest that St. George's had in their election, which is good and bad. Primary sometimes helps kind of weed things out on the front end. It lets you know where you're at, lets you know kind of how you stand.
Yeah.
And it's, I guess, good practice for the general election, if that makes sense, right? Because you have to get out there and you have to work pretty hard. In fact, you probably have to work harder in the primary in a lot of cases than you do the general election.
So yeah, I agree with you. That not having the primary kind of gives you this, especially when you're running as a challenger, right? As somebody who's not an incumbent, it's almost like, well, how do we gauge how we're doing? How do we know what the voter? There's no pollster, right? There's not a lot of money for that. And when you do spend money for that, you get, it's like a target where all of a sudden it's like, why are you spending all this money on this thing? It's like, well, unfortunately that's how much it costs to go do a stupid survey and call a bunch of potential voters and actually do a legitimate survey of the citizens. It's really expensive to do. It's not cheap to do it.
Yeah, which is why you only see it in your larger elections, and typically out of northern Utah. Right? Yeah,
just bigger metros.
I don't even think St. George City did any type of legitimate polling. They might.
So we did it as our PAC. So when getting into this, for us to be able to promote votestg.com and start like being an active like political, organization, we had to be registered with the deputy lieutenant's office, or I guess the lieutenant governor's office.
Right.
And So we built out a PAC and we ran polls. It's expensive, dude. It's expensive. We found donors. We found people to contribute to the PAC to be able to run it. But then that, there's not much advertising. There's not a whole lot of money left for like any advertising. All you're doing is trying to say. And so the reason we ran it as the PAC goes is because we wanted to make sure what do the citizens of St. George believe? Like, what is it that people value? What's their feeling on growth? Like, ask some good questions around understanding, is it just the idea that we're growing in population? Is it that we're growing too fast? How do they feel about Dixie and the heritage and that piece of it? How do they feel about affordable housing? How do they feel about water? Right? Really try to get a good questionnaire out there. I think we ran it was 40 questions or something like that. So this was, phone to phone conversations, surveyed over 400 residents. And so that kind of helped us build the PAC kind of trajectory on how we move forward. But, there's all these rules. I can't share that survey with candidates. I can't allow candidates to use that without disclosing that that's what we've done. And so when we did all of the marketing on it, all we did was we had the survey done, and then we reached out to specific candidates and said, hey, we want to promote, all these candidates in this way. And we were trying to stay arm's length from the candidate, because the candidate can't have any contribution to the marketing ads that you do, right? They don't get any say in what you say. And you have to disclose, like, hey, this is paid for by a separate organization. So getting into this, I'm learning this whole thing. And we have no guidance. There's basically just a bunch of us knuckleheads put this together and research our own way about going through this process.
It's a ton of work, right? So kudos to you guys for actually doing it and putting the time and effort into it and being involved, because far too often the public's fairly apathetic, until it comes time that there's a ballot in front of them. It's like, oh, who the heck do I vote for now? I mean, who are these people? And so, as a candidate, you try to have a good website. You try to do what you can, outreach to people that you know, or friends, or family, or social media. If you can use that to your favor. Of course, sometimes social media can completely backfire, right? And open you up in ways that you don't want to be exposed, right?
Well, I mean,
it's. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. And when you bring up polling, it's just a small sampling, right? It's not a vote, and so it kind of gives you an idea. But at the end of the day, the vote is the greatest poll of all, right? Kind of,
because what I've learned through this process is that the voters, they're not educated. They don't really know what's going on.
Well, I mean, a lot of times that's what happens. I mean, I've been
and mainly because there's no resources to go to, right? Like if I was to say, because I think you were sat on the city council before, right?
I did. Yep.
So in some of the research that I've done, now I didn't do a ton, a vast amount of research.
Right.
However, there's not a place to where we could be like, hey, what did Troy vote for, when he was a city council member before?
So you can do that. I mean, you can go pull up meetings and minutes from past councils, but it's pretty arduous to go weed through all those and say, okay, when was this on the agenda? Well, my heck, I'm looking at.
But you got to have a specific thought in mind.
Now I'm looking at 20 different meetings, and I'm trying to read all those agendas and find out, what did they discuss? And then really, is it in the minutes? Because the minutes is only still a sampling of what the actual discussion was. I mean, I've seen agendas where the minutes are, maybe a page of notes, and it was an hour and a half discussion. You don't really get the full context of it unless you watch the video, and then watching hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of video, unless you're directed in that direction and know what you're.
And you have to care. You have to have
you absolutely have to care.
There has to be some incentive for you to do that, right? And
that's part of why it's representative government, right?
Yeah,
you're voting for the people to represent you, and you hope that they have the intent of truly representing you and your interests, and not maybe their own or somebody else's interests. You have to hope that person identifies with what the direction you want, and that's why that's why elections matter, right? Because if that incumbent at that point is not heading the direction that you think that the city should be heading, great. That election is going to change course.
Yeah.
Right. I've been a little critical in this campaign pardon me, on some of the things that have happened. But I really, in a lot of ways, think that the current state of local politics is more apathetic now than it was when I was on the council because of COVID, right? What happened during COVID? We told people don't show up, don't come in, don't be part. If you have a concern, send us an email. Trust us, we'll read it, right? And I haven't seen the public kind of come full circle back to, hey, we should show up. We should be involved. We should be reading these agendas to see what's going on the agenda, see what our elected leaders are voting on. And so I'd like to see that, come back, the public involvement come back. If there's any one thing that I'm kind of running on at this point is I'd really like to see the public more involved. Because if the public's not there giving you their voice, or you're not in a public hearing from that public, you're kind of working within your own little vacuum chamber, right?
Yeah, true.
I mean, that council's sitting there, they're discussing things amongst themselves, but there's a lot of good input from the public and that I don't think the council receives as often as they should.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It really does. And I do agree with you. In some sense, I agree with you. And then in other cases, I feel like it has stoked the flames of some groups into over engagement, right? Like high activity with some small groups.
You mean like in St. George's election this year?
Man, it's wild. It's wild. So like, because I would say like going to the debate, the St. George City Council debate,
right?
They filled the Eccles main stage.
I was there.
It was massive. Like every single seat, there was standing room.
And it was great to see. There was a ton of people there, and there was a ton of involvement. And sometimes those polarizing issues can bring people out and get more people involved.
In Ivins, the city council meetings have been packed. There are times when they're not as packed as other times, but
right.
You have really engaged citizenship in Ivins. I was at one particular one, which it was what they were voting on to approve a large project in Santa Clara off of Pioneer Parkway.
Okay.
Over by I'm gonna blow it on the streets, but it's just down the street from Harmon's, right? And this area of town was slated to be, this is where higher, and I'm air quotes higher, because I think the total units per acre was like 7. And 7 units per acre,
which isn't very high,
that's low density. Like I'll be honest, like that's low density.
It's considered low density.
That's low density. But in the minds of Santa Clara, that was like you literally put in a 50-story high-rise building, right?
Yeah.
The whole city council was packed, right? So in some cases, there's like these polarizing things that engage people, and then there's apathy on all these other things that they probably should be paying attention to, which is what kind of inspired me to do the podcast. I'm like, how do we reach out to people? How do we have longer form conversation to where we don't get stuck in the weeds about?
Well, I think it's an education process both ways, right?
Yeah.
From the public to the elected leaders, they need to educate the elected leaders on what their concerns are, and the elected leaders sometimes need to have that same conversation back. You bring up the density at 7 units per acre. I can show you fantastic projects that are 20, 25, 30 units per acre, not, in bigger metros and whatnot. And I can show you disaster projects that are 2 or 3 units per acre, right? So density really isn't directly related to quality of product or value or anything like that. And so it's good to have kind of those conversations with the public, back and forth. It's funny when you brought up the, St. George with the kind of the polarizing interests. Mayor Randall caught a lot of heat because of the open. I call it open mic night, right?
It was.
Washington City used to have that.
And it's not something that has always happened either.
No,
Mayor Pike put that into place.
But it's not a statutorily required meeting.
Right.
It's hey, come on in, tell us what you think.
Or is it really all that traditional, right? It's not like they've been doing this thing in St. George for decades.
No, it's at the mayor's discretion. The mayor controls the agenda, right? And so Mayor Nielsen in Washington City always had it every quarter. Mm-hmm. Mayor Randall has had it every month. But what you've seen over the last, year, 2 years, whatever it is in St. George with some of the polarizing issues is you had the interested parties come in and use that to kind of get their voice heard. And I can understand their desire to do so, but there still needs to be decorum in the council chambers, right? If you want to yell and scream and you want to have a rally, knock yourself out. Do it outside. But in the council chambers, you need to have decorum, right? In Washington City, they actually went a step further in my book and eliminated public hearings at the council level for general plan and zone changes. Those are the two items that most directly affect your property value and your neighborhood. They said, well, the state statute says we don't have to have 2 public hearings. We only have to have 1. So we'll have the public hearing at the planning commission level. We're going to eliminate the public hearing at the city council level. And in Washington, nobody said a word, right? And I think that goes back to that COVID thing. Hey, people aren't watching, right? And so when they eliminated those public hearings,
I think Santa Clara has the same policy too, right? I think
I don't know. I don't know about Santa Clara. I know Washington City.
Because this was like that
it.
Frustration with that unit is that like people were there because they were voting on it, and like I can't talk about this because they like had to like make this point. It's like saying, hey, the public comment on proposing and
it never goes good when you try to limit public comment.
Yeah,
right?
It's a bad strategy sometimes.
Right. So I mean, but here's the challenge for me. If what we're going to do is say we're only going to have 1 public hearing, fine. Let's have that conversation. I'm okay having that conversation. I disagree with it, but I'm okay having that conversation. But if the 1 public hearing that we're going to have should be in front of my elected body that has all of the authority and not the appointed body that's a recommending body only.
Right.
And quite frankly, the public hearing between the Planning Commission and the City Council are 2 different public hearings in my book. Planning Commission looks at an application that says, does this meet ordinance?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Is it following the rules?
Is it following the rules? Right?
Already established rules.
And even if a planning commissioner doesn't like it, if it's following the rules, they typically will, render an recommendation for approval because it's following the rules.
Right.
City Council looks at it and says, does this meet community?
Yeah.
Right. Those are 2 totally different conversations, and in my book, 2 totally different public hearings. And so I've been pretty vocal in this election, in Washington City, saying I don't think that was right. And I think
what's the feedback that you've gotten back from them?
I think more people agree with me than what the current council did.
Do you think was the purpose of that to expedite things? What do you think? What was the reason?
I think it was twofold. I think they looked at it and said, why do we have to hear the same arguments that the Planning Commission's already heard? Part of the when they rewrote that ordinance and eliminated those public hearings, what they said in that ordinance change was that the council members will review the comments over YouTube or the video record, right? So to sum it up, trust us, we'll watch your comments on YouTube is not good policy in my book, right? I had to be able to look eye to eye with my elected leaders, not trust that they're going to review my comments over the internet. Where was I going with it? I totally lost my train of thought.
That's okay. So
no, the other one, expediting the process. So that was, I know that was part of the discussion was, well, we can save, time to expedite the process, but really what are they expediting? They're expediting an hour for a public hearing. Because they didn't,
or at least like a day.
They didn't.
Because
it's not like they saved a couple of weeks in doing it.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things when I was on the council, one of the things that Colleen Granger pushed us to do, and
she is who?
She was on the council with me over in Washington City 4 years ago, and I totally disagreed with her when she pushed to do this. But you want to work with your council members. It's like, okay, we'll do it. When a public hearing came in and you had an audience full of people that were pretty wound up, or heated or direct, or however you want to put it, passionate. There you go. Passionate. That's a better word.
I use that for myself all the time. I'm not angry. I'm passionate.
You're right. Well, sometimes you get people that are very passionate, and you're doing a public hearing, and then you're expected to vote right afterwards, and you don't really have time to reflect on that public hearing. And so she asked that we as a council add 2 weeks. So we would have a public hearing, and then we wouldn't make a decision until 2 weeks later. That did a couple of things. First off, a lot of times people need to get their voice out, and once they've had a chance to say their piece, they'll accept the way things go. The other one is it gave the council members more time to reflect on what they had just heard, and in cases of inexperienced council members, it allowed them time to ask more questions, dig in, talk to staff on an outside of that public process. And so it added 2 weeks there. But in the end, I think for at least the contested items, it actually reduced time because instead of a council tabling it and then bringing everybody back 2 weeks later, or instead of a denial that caused the applicant to have to go all the way back to the starting board, we had that 2 weeks. We had it was calming. It was more.
What's the difference between doing that and the tabling? Maybe help me understand what So they'd say, hey, we'll have 2 weeks and then we'll vote on it for sure.
Well, it's kind of the same thing as tabling.
Okay.
It would almost be like, well, we're just going to automatically table an item. If it's a big issue, but it's tabling is somewhat arbitrary in the fact that you may or may not table an item, and then the people that are in the audience that showed up, and then the applicants, they don't know what to think for 2 weeks, and where you just say, hey, look, we've got a 2 week holdover. And
what
everybody
kind of about the 2 weeks? Why 2 weeks? Just because that's when the city council would meet again?
City council typically meets every other week, right? And so it was just we're going to hold the vote until the next time the city council has an agenda.
Is there a reason why we do it every 2 weeks, or is it just
no? Some councils do it once a month. Some councils will do it more. I think the state statute says once a month is minimum.
Once a month,
but Washington City's always done twice. But yeah, like I said, in that case, that 2 week holdover, at the end, I was a big supporter of it because it did make for better decisions. It made for better education of the council members that may not understand the issue or the issue before us as well. And so they made better decisions. And in the long run, I fully supported it. And I was kind of disappointed when 4 years ago, right after I was off the council, they did away with that 2 week holdover. And now to go back and say, hey, we're just going to do away with the public hearing altogether in front of the council and only have the one at the planning commission, I think is a step in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
Two steps in the wrong direction in my book. But
yeah, I definitely.
But certainly from that perspective,
I think
a public
agree
hearing
with you
is
for sure.
a statutorily required meeting that you have to have, whether it's 1 or 2 or 10 or whatever, versus what St. George City did where hey, we're not going to have a free-for-all open mic night, or we're going to suspend it for a period of time. And really, they didn't. They got so much heat over it; it never got suspended. It was back on 2 weeks later, or
no. I think they suspended it. I think it was like 4 months. I think there was like 4 months in there where they weren't doing it at all, and then they fired it back up again. But I think Jimmy Hughes really was pushing.
I don't know that it was 4 months. I thought it was kind of back on the following. But hey, I could be wrong.
Even then, what I thought was odd to me is that this open mic is to express, frustrations for something, right?
Well, it's always been, hey, look, are there too many weeds in your neighborhood? You got a pothole that's giving you grief. Is there a stop sign that's
this group
that
came up and they were
in?
holding in the Constitution like we have freedom of speech, right? They did this whole thing when she suspended it, and then she walked out of the room all dramatic, and then she came back, and then it was like. You always hear about those fights where all of a sudden somebody storms out of the room and then they come back like there's nothing wrong, right? It totally felt like that. But so I asked these guys who came in with these signs after, because they all walked out at like 6:30. It was dinner time, right? So they all they didn't stay for the whole meeting. They left.
Right.
But immediately upon that, it was the budget hearing for the year. I said, why? I walked out and I stopped him. I said, why didn't you couldn't speak about just whatever you wanted, and you were really upset about that. But you didn't take enough time to look at the budget and find one little thing in there that you felt like the budget ties back to everything that the city council is doing. Yeah. You could have got up, because they didn't suspend public comment on whether or not they should have a budget that's $519 million. They had nothing to say about all of that.
Right,
but they didn't take the time to just say that.
But it's interesting that there was a fair amount of discussion the other night at the debate on budget.
Yeah.
Right? So
where was everybody?
Exactly.
Where was everyone?
Right. On the big ticket items, the things that really matter, you should be involved.
You should be involved.
Right?
Absolutely. And I didn't go to both of them. I can't say that I watched the whole thing, but I don't remember seeing Brad Bennett or Paula Smith up there talking about the budget, at the challenging the city council in those meetings. Now, they might have. I might have missed that opportunity. But my thought was, with all these people that were upset about it, there's public comment being offered up along the way outside of just this general public comment period. But it goes back to your apathy. It's like people want to get upset when they can't just talk about whatever they want, but they don't want to do the investigatory research to find out, okay, hey, I have an issue with this exact thing that they're doing. That gets brought up all the time, which I just think that's an odd thing to get upset about.
If you have questions about what happened in a community, there's always grandma. You can file a grandma request.
Yeah.
The staff has to give it to you. The staff has to tell you. So that's always an option for the public to go and voting records are public. Sometimes we used to have it. I don't know if they still do, to be honest with you, but we used to have a running spreadsheet of voting record.
Yeah.
And often it's put out there. I've seen it over social media from the city where they'll put out, okay, last night's agenda was this, and here's the voting record.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, again, I think the whole thing in St. George where they got off course was just decorum in the council chambers. I mean, I was watching this stuff the other day on Capitol Hill in D.C., where I can't remember who was testifying, but the people kept hopping up and yelling and screaming, and they get hauled out by security. Well, they should be hauled out by security because that's not the proper place. If you want to yell and scream, go outside on the Capitol steps, raise Cain, do what you want.
Yeah.
Just in the chambers, respect the chambers and respect the process.
Yeah, I agree. I completely agree with that. So tell me about.
Fortunately, in Washington City, we haven't had that issue.
So tell me
that I've seen.
Let's do a quick recap, like for people that might not know you, because we jumped right into it. Give me the fast food version of where you've been.
Fast food version of who I am.
Who you are and where you've been, and then we can kind of talk into what do you want to see change? Why are you running?
Got it. So my grandpa moved here in the late 40s. Moved here to coach at Dixie, and back then when you were coach, right? So he coached all the different athletics. And then my dad grew up between here and Ogden. And so, Dad loved it down here. He kind of started establishing himself up in the Salt Lake area, but first opportunity he got to move back home, he did. And so that was 1982. We moved down as a family. I was 7 or 8. I was born in 76, so I don't know what time that year, but 7 or 8 years old, we moved down, and I've lived here short of the time that I spent in the military, lived here ever since.
Nice.
I was a helicopter mechanic in the Army. I got at my contract. I was an independent soul when I was younger, so sometimes independent people can get maybe a little bit more trouble than they should be.
Yeah.
And I could recognize that in myself. So when I went in the military, I had them send me overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Just give me a little separation from home and kind of be my own person. So I was sent to Germany. I lived there for 5 years. I deployed to Kuwait in 95. I deployed to Bosnia in 96. I was on the first convoy going across the Sava River into Bosnia, and in that whole mess. I mean, by then
that was a mess.
The fighting had stopped, but it's pretty sobering when you're living in a country that in 1984 hosted the Winter Olympics in Yugoslavia, and then it got split into Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina. We went from the Winter Olympics in 84 to ethnic cleansing in 92.
Yeah.
And, I was there as they were trying to keep all the parties separate. And I got pictures of the kids that we would see outside of our gate, and those are framed and on my office wall to just ground me, I guess, because you look at those kids and you think, no matter how bad I have it, those kids had it worse.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's kind of sobering to live in that socialistic environment of government is just, heavy handed.
But also seeing how quickly society could just tip over.
Oh, how super fast. And in that area has been fighting for thousands of years. Right now, what you're seeing in Israel, those people have been fighting for thousands of years. I think it's bred into them. I don't know that you're ever going to solve the issue. Yeah. Try as you might. You just, I think, maybe try to manage it. Nonetheless, I did 5 years over there. My daughter was born in Germany. She's dual citizen. Well, I guess dual citizen's relative, because when you're 18, you're kind of one citizen or the other. But if she ever went over to Germany, and they could conscript her and put her in the military. So,
yeah, well, there you go.
Then I came back. I spent 3 years at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in the 101st Airborne Division. And it was all, like I said, I was in aviation. I was a helicopter mechanic, so it was all kind of light infantry aviation. Enjoyed the heck out of being in the military. I'd have probably done 20 years if it wasn't for my family. My daughter at that point was getting ready to go to school, going into first grade. And I came down Department of the Army Select for recruiter duty. Wasn't real jazzed about that. I liked my guys and I liked my job. And
you can get put anywhere though for that.
Pretty much. I tried getting it,
especially for the Army.
When you go over 10 years, you're involuntary extended to 20. And so I told the Army, I said, if you're going to put me over 10, which means you're taking me to 20, I ought at least get duty station. The Army told me no, and I said, well, then I have an option.
Yeah, right.
And at that point, in time, my dad had a fair amount of work in commercial development, office parks.
St. George started it. We were picking up the pace.
Yeah, I mean, he had some retail stuff. I mean, so commercial really is where I've enjoyed construction, and that's building businesses, helping people provide for their families. Certainly in that process, providing for my own family, but seeing the commercial side of Southern Utah grow, and so I got into commercial development with my dad. That was 2001. Been in it ever since, with the exception of, 2008 hit. Commercial kind of went quiet. And so I got into residential, built quite a few homes for people. So when you're building homes for folks, you're dealing with their money and their home, the two most important things that they have, typically is, from a possession standpoint, right?
Yeah.
And so, you hear a lot about contractors that have battles with the people that they worked with because there's this perception of, well, is this contractor giving me it straight? Or, is he making money on the backside? Or, question. I was always very open with my clients. Every invoice was out on the table. If I got a rebate for appliances, it wasn't my rebate. They paid the bill, so it was their rebate, and I always credited them back. Dixie Power, for example, always had a rebate on power, and so I would give the rebate back to the client.
Nice.
And I just tried to be really open with them and really straightforward with them. And so most everybody I've ever built for, they've have a really good relationship. Even
was
today.
It mainly custom homes? Did you do any
no, I'll be honest with you. I did mostly spec homes, but I don't know that in 23 years and I built homes before 2008 hit, and I built homes, obviously after, but in 23 years, I don't know that I've ever built the same home twice.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not a production guy that says, here's my house plan and here's my 3 different color choices. I've always looked at it and said, if I'm building your home, that's your house.
Yeah.
And I'm proud to build it for you, but at the end of the day, I want to provide you with whatever I can. But along the way, I've built a fair amount of specs. I'll find a lot here, or, my partners and I've gone and bought, 7, 8, 10 lots and then just kind of built them out as specs. And typically when you're doing that, half of them will be spec and half of them, somebody will come and say, hey, I want a house here too, but I want it a little bit different.
Yeah.
So I've done that over the years. 2016, I got on council.
Okay.
And, I was fortunate to serve with some people that, had the really conservative. Colleen Granger used to be the superintendent of the Washington County School District. Right. She doesn't advertise this. She's got a doctorate. She's an incredibly smart lady. Jeff Turek had been on the council for, 10 years. Ken Nielsen had been on the council for 10 years. Roger Carter, from a city manager perspective, has a doctorate. Very competent, very, very smart public administrator. His style is entirely different from the current city manager, which I appreciate them both for the styles that they have.
Yeah.
But it was a very conservative council. I enjoyed it. I worked really hard. I showed up, educated, having walked properties, talked to people. But sometimes when you're on the council, you're also put in the position of defending the actions of your council and prior councils. And oftentimes there are things that come up that just, you're the lucky guy that's sitting in the seat, right?
Yeah, right.
So, 4 years ago, there was several issues with the Blue Can program. I was the guy sitting in the seat on the solid waste board.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm kind of in a position to defend the Blue Can program as it's not working well and imploding. So that was kind of a knock.
Why did you feel like you had to defend it?
Because I always supported the decisions of the council. I may not have agreed with the council. It may have been a 4-1 and I was the one. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, the will of the council is the direction forward, right? And so even if I was the odd man out, it doesn't mean that I agreed with it, but I still supported the decision that was made.
Yeah.
Right.
You were still going to give it the old college try, right? You weren't going to just allow. You're not going to undermine. Well,
and maybe the better way to put it is own it.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah. That's a good way.
It's if I'm on the council, and the council makes a decision, again, even if it's one that I don't agree with, that was a council decision, and that's the way forward. And so
maybe
you kind of are just stuck in that. It's an odd position, but that's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah, it's tough because I've heard this too. Is like because there's the administrative process of it, right? And you're like, hey, we make a decision and we want to give the best effort at it. And then as this board member, though, maybe help me understand. You were put in a position because it wasn't working and it was implemented before you got there. Maybe help me just understand this scenario.
No, well, for example, I mean, the blue. Since I brought the Blue Can up, we'll use the Blue Can. That was a vote that was agreed to. The council adopted it ahead of me.
Okay,
I didn't get to make that vote.
Okay, got it.
The Blue Cans rolled out into people's driveways 2 weeks after I was sworn in.
Okay, right? So it looked like it was yours,
and there was a lot of people that were pretty wound up about that,
which is so funny.
But then I was
save the planet, people.
It's the way it is.
Just trying to save the planet.
But then I ended up on the solid waste board, right? And so I was on that board looking for solutions, looking for ways to fix it, for ways to make it work. And I just wasn't going to go out and try to undermine the process,
right? Okay.
But nonetheless, where I was going with that is, coming into the election 4 years ago, that was kind of a hot ticket item. Milepost 11 was kind of a hot ticket item. And then I had 2 council members that said, we're not running again. So you had 2 wide open seats, which when you have wide open seats, that kind of brings people out to say, hey, I think I could fill that position. Yeah. I'll raise my hand. And being the one incumbent with a couple of open seats, and I can't remember if it was 9 or 12 people running. It was a higher number. I think it was 12. I was just, when the people are coming in saying, hey, I would do something better, I was the one incumbent that's there saying, geez, I was part of making these decisions, or I was part of defending them. It didn't work out in my favor 4 years ago. Yeah. This year is it's a different election, right? Mm-hmm. The people that are on the council, they now have a record. Yeah. And you can look at it and say, if I had been on the council and part of that decision-making process, would I be trying to identify my policy differences today? No, I probably would be more of take that previous tactic of, well, I was part of the decision process. Maybe I need to support that. Yeah. But now, I can look at it and say, I did always opt for more public involvement. I did opt for not taking on debt. I did opt for, being tight with the taxpayer dollar. And so I think it's fair to say that during this election, I can throw up some differences in policy and keep it on the policy level of, A versus B. This is what you have now, and this is what I'm running to provide as a challenger.
Yeah.
And so we'll see how it works out in the election, right?
So where do you think what are the biggest challenges facing Washington City in the next 4 years? From my perspective, just briefly, they as a economic mix, they've overbuilt residential units.
Now understand, you always have a commercial boom behind a residential boom. So you're going to get some of this ebb and flow of, well, we're a little heavy on residential, but that's just letting the commercial catch up behind.
Okay. I don't know if I necessarily think there's always a commercial boom behind a residential boom. Only from the standpoint is, from the way I understand it, there's only so much water. The city of Washington City themselves don't own enough water rights to build out more units than they already have permitted. And so beyond that, then that would also include M&I, so municipal and industrial use. So whether it's a residential unit or an industrial unit, commercial being included, there still needs to be water provided to those commercial units. So if the water's not there, if they go to the Washington Conservancy District to get water and it's not there, and we filled all of the water that we had for residential, which is a cost to the local government, not a value add. How do we navigate from there? So I think I see some challenge there. I'm hoping, you're right with the commercial side, because I know that's for the budget to really be able to sustain itself, for the city to be able to provide services and continue to operate at a maximum efficiency. They got to have sales tax revenue. They got to have other forms of revenue coming in outside of what's going on in the residential side.
Let's unpack both of those, because you got a couple issues there, right? Yep. One is the tax collection, or the general fund. Mm-hmm. Okay. Roughly 2/3 of the general fund comes from sales tax. The other third comes from property taxes.
Okay.
Right. That's in Washington City. So the more we can build that sales tax side, the more we're going to pay for it. The biggest budget line item in the general fund is public safety.
Right.
Police and fire. Mm-hmm. And so we want to be able to build that commercial to be able to keep our community safe. And I've always, when it comes to budget, I've always kind of deferred to the public safety. If we don't have a safe community, what have we got? Right. Mm-hmm. Nothing.
Real quick, remind me, do you guys have a utility company?
We do. Yeah. So that's a separate fund. That's an enterprise fund, right?
Okay, right.
So when you
on the general fund, I'm just trying to think of big costs from cities. Public safety is always one or two. Enterprise fund has a big cost to it as well. But that a lot of times, from what I've seen in a lot of research I've done, is that those enterprise funds can be the reasons why cities go bankrupt. Like those things They can implode sometimes, but it's
maybe
not,
so. But
it's rare.
But it's pretty loaded. I mean, the other night you heard in the St. George debate, since you were there, they were talking about $517,000 budget. Well, that's everything, right?
$519 million. Yeah.
Yeah, that's everything under one deal.
Exactly.
It's not actually enterprise funds.
It's like 119, I think, is the actual general fund in St. George.
Right. So you need to look at general fund versus the entire budget.
Correct.
Because the entire budget's going to include, capital facilities expenditures, infrastructure build out. If the city needs a new transformer station or substation, that is going to be spent in that budget. And so when you're looking at an overall budget, separate the general fund.
Agreed.
Right.
Yep.
And then the enterprise funds kind of work on their own. For example, the power and water in a municipal like Washington City, typically the goal is to run at a zero profit.
Right.
They're not run for profit.
Right.
Dixie Power is a co-op that's government subsidized. Municipal Power, Washington City's run at a zero basis. Rocky Mountain Power is a for-profit. They're typically 30% higher rates than municipal. Mm-hmm. Okay. But look at the general fund on St. George City, Washington City, Santa Clara. And it's predominantly going to be public safety. And then after public safety, it's frosting in my book. That's where you get parks, road maintenance, administration, things like that. So if fund the public safety first, frosting second. If we don't have the money, you know what? I can deal with a pothole a little bit longer, or maybe you mow the parks once a week versus twice a week, or, you can play with that, but the public safety, you got to make sure that that's whole and solvent and taken care of.
And be able to have some rainy day stuff built out, just like what happened with fire, in St. George, the cost. And I don't know if the case is the same thing in Washington City, if they had the same fire suppression.
Yeah. So when it comes to rainy day funds, state mandates between 5 and 25% of your overall general fund be maintained in a rainy day fund. In Washington a few years ago,
that's a big range, 5 and 25%.
It is. Range. It is a big range, but at least 5%, no more than 25. Now, if you think about it, if the government revenue shut off today, that's 3 months in the bank at 25%.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a big range, but it's not huge money. The county is not under that same structure. They have, in a lot of cases, more than 100% in the bank. And so they have a lot higher rainy day funds, quote unquote.
They also don't have very many entitlements, right? They don't have very much obligation that they need to maintain in comparison to those
different
cities.
Entity. Certainly they don't deal with the city budgets. But in Washington City, a few years ago, Telegraph was sliding off the hill. Were you here for that?
No, but I've heard about it.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah, it was a big deal.
And Washington City was robbing Peter to pay Paul, pulling from different funds and writing loans to the water or sewer or whatnot to get the funds to fix Telegraph. Well, that rainy day fund, that's what it's for.
Yeah,
things like that. Things to fix. St. George has said, "Hey, we're going to bridge the gap until we can figure out a better solution on the public safety," which. It bridges a gap. That's what a rainy day fund is for. So I mean, Washington has that no different, but you don't want to look at those as normal order of business, right? I don't want to look at that rainy day fund and say, okay, now I'm going to be able to tap into this as an ongoing fund.
Well, it's just
it's a set aside.
Yeah, the thought would be is are we adequately funding that? Is it at 5%? Is it 25%? I think that's just something that I thought in my head, because I don't think St. George. I don't think St. George has as much in it as they probably should have it based off its size.
I don't know. I know that when I came on the council in 2016, we were at the lower end of that spectrum, and the goal for my council was we want to be on the upper end of that spectrum. And by the time we left, we had hit that 25% mark, so that was something that we were fairly proud of. We were pretty conservative with that taxpayer dollar. Now, I don't think anything over that, I don't think is wise, because at that point you're hoarding funds. I don't think a government should hoard taxpayer dollars. The taxpayer ought to get the value of their dollar, right, put into their community.
Yeah.
And hoarding funds is out of my book, but you do need to have some sort of a buffer right there.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other thing you brought up was water, right? Back in the 80s, and of course I, obviously lived here in the 80s before Quail Reservoir.
Yeah,
we had a water problem. We're out of water. We can't support this community, and then we built Quail.
The dam failed,
and then and it flooded my house out.
Oh no!
I lived in the ranches. Oh yeah,
I'm bringing up painful memories.
I remember mucking the mud out of my house. Oh yeah,
man.
Yeah. I lived with that when I was a kid, and that was a tough deal for my parents, because homeowners insurances didn't cover it. The water district didn't cover it, and it was a big deal. My
parents
parents
holding the bag.
It was it was tough, but no, I mean we built Quail Reservoir. Yeah. We built the water treatment plant. Now we built Sand Hollow. I'm in construction. I've been funding that Lake Powell pipeline since they implemented that impact fee. 04, 05, somewhere in there. 2 years ago, I did a project, and the water fee alone on that one project was $655,000. Right, so I've written a lot of checks to the water district, and I'm hoping at some point that pipeline gets in, because the water really isn't coming from Powell. The water's coming from Flaming Gorge. We just let it out of Flaming Gorge, leave it in the water system, leave it,
which is
for the use of the fish and the anglers.
But which is what the lower basin states are litigating, though, right? Is that they've threatened to say we had an agreement that the water is being allocated in this manner, and Utah's trying to change the rules by saying, hey, the upper plateau is trying to give water shares to the lower plateau, and that's outside the agreement. So that's what they're banking the litigate. That's what they've threatened the litigation on.
I get that, but it's
from
kind of
what's
hard
happening with federal government too, though.
It's kind of hard to take their argument with
it doesn't make sense either.
Face value when they're overutilizing their allocation, right?
And then
Phoenix is and Arizona is grossly overutilizing the amount of water.
Additionally,
so is
we take the water from there to the Virgin River. It still goes to Lake Mead, and it still goes back to essentially the end user anyway. Like it's the whole thing is crazy to me, but it's control.
Right.
It's power and control, right? And given
with water, you're going to control growth, right? And that's really at the end of the day the biggest argument. The water is control. That's how we control growth. So, Warner Valley is the next step in that. That'll be another reservoir. There'll be another storage.
Tokerville too.
Tokerville, the St. George is doing the reuse and pumping that in. Washington City's been putting dry lines, irrigation lines in their subdivisions for, almost 2 decades now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that's been going on for years. And so I think it really, when it comes to water, it's kind of an all hands on deck. I struggle a little bit when you see, Black Desert or some of these other big resorts that are water centric. Black Desert uses a ton of water for the golf course. Desert Color has the crystal pools and all that. When we as a community are being asked to conserve, and at the end of the day, as a builder, I'm doing my part to try to conserve everywhere I possibly can, because my conservation potentially means an opportunity for my kids to be here and live here. Because at some point when we shut the door on this community, we start exporting our kids, and that's the reality of it.
Yeah, and
young families need to look at it and say, we need to be respectful and conserve where we can, because otherwise our kids and grandkids have got to go someplace else. And I want my kids to have the same opportunity that I had to live here, to build a life here, to build a family here, to have a career here. And so if we're going to conserve water, I don't want to conserve water so I can see a Black Desert pop up. I want to conserve my water so I can see a neighborhood pop up, right? Mm-hmm. Of families and friends and people that we interact with. But since I brought up on the builder side, personally, I haven't put grass in any projects that I've built for probably close to a decade. Right. Homes that I build anymore, I don't have a tanked water heater. I have a tankless water heater. I run a recirc pump off those tankless water heaters that doesn't run continuously and heat water. It runs on a push button. So I hit a button in the bathroom. It pre-runs hot water through the line so that when I hit my tap, I'm not dumping a bunch of water down the drain to get hot water to shave my face with. Right.
Right.
So, there's a lot of little things we can do to conserve water that don't really negatively impact us in our quality of life.
Yeah.
You can have a nice landscaped yard and neighborhood that's all on drip, and it doesn't have to look harsh and feel like Tucson.
Yeah.
Right. It can feel soft and it can feel inviting.
What do you think, just taking this back to where we kind of started with the commercial growth and the residential growth and this imbalance between the two things. Do you feel like they're on the trajectory of bringing in that commercial? Because I know, yes. I think you've been
absolutely
a lead player in Grapevine Crossing.
Yep.
That's a Sitla owned property, right? Or it was originally
with agreement. Yeah. It is still largely Sitla owned. Yes, absolutely.
Sitla owned. And then it takes down in stages. Maybe walk me through where you're at with that development as a whole. And
yeah, so I started working on that, a long time ago. I built Blackbird Diner up there. I went to State Trust and I said, hey, look, I want to put a restaurant here. And they said, knock yourself out. Yeah. So I went and got with Randy Wong, sold him on the vision of putting a restaurant up there.
And he's the owner of Black Bear?
He's the owner of Black Bear. Initially Randy was going to rent from me, and that was kind of a way to, for me to look at long-term type of a deal for me. Randy came to me and said, hey, would you let me own it instead of just rent from you? And I said, absolutely, Randy. But I just want to get good inventory, good product coming to Washington City.
Yeah.
So we approached the state trust. We put in an offer. It was accepted. We had to go through a request for competing proposals. Even though we offered to buy one lot, we still had to go through a request for competing proposals, advertise it out, allow anybody in the community to come and swipe the project away from us. At the end of the day,
I've heard it's kind of a circus.
It's
maybe a circus isn't the best way to describe it, but it is a red taped.
There is a lot of processes that are built into the system, right? Yeah. It's not what people think that, hey, you just get cherry picked. There's a lot that goes into it. But we ended up building that for Randy. At the time he had the number one black bear in the chain on South Main and Bluff. We opened that one up. He cannibalized himself a little bit,
Yikes.
Pulled him down, which is fine, right? Because he's rebounded right back into number one and number three. Depending on what week is going on, those two stores are between one and three
good to hear. That was
in
good
the
to
chain
hear.
of 250 stores.
Yeah, that's a problem with a lot of restaurants. They open up another one and they don't realize they're just taken from their other location. Right. But anyway, so that's good to hear. They bounce back. So that's
largest black bear diner under roof.
That's cool.
So 9,300 feet. There's actually 3 full cooking lines in that restaurant. He can handle a lot of people. So, if you don't want to cook Thanksgiving dinner, they do a great one.
Nice.
It's
a good plug right there.
We had Thanksgiving there last year.
This episode is brought to you by Black Bear Diner. Go out there.
Free advertising.
Get some delicious food.
Go tell them
It's all free advertising on this show. It's
They're
all
good.
free.
They're good folks over there. They've treated me well over the years.
Yeah, my parents love it over there. I've been there a bunch of times. It's great. It's a great place to eat. So Grapevine Crossing. So was the first piece to it? Was that like
that
the first entry?
That was a parcel that was there and available, and so I put in for it. And then later on went to them and said, hey, I'd like to, move in this direction on the commercial and the retail side, hospitality side. We went through an RFP process on that. There was another request for competing proposals at the end of the day. That was a totally independent process from city council. Mm-hmm. The city didn't have any involvement in it. Nobody weighed in on it. It wasn't, it was a totally separate thing that went through a board up in Salt Lake.
Yep.
And we've been working that project for quite a long time. There's good things happening, but in commercial, a lot of things in commercial take a long
I learned
time,
that.
And so patience is key. When it comes to commercial. And again, there's good things happening up there.
Yeah.
One of the other things I did when I was on the council, I never really took. The money I made on the council, I kind of put in a separate account, and I did different things with it. Sometimes I donated it. Sometimes I, do something around the community with it. But it wasn't really something I looked to as an income. So I typically didn't take it home. But one of the things that I noticed, I recognized as was potentially an issue in Washington. St. George over the years has been very good about annexing properties in. Mm-hmm. And Washington for years was always kind of content to say, let St. George deal with that headache. We don't need to. And it really came to a head when the current airport was annexed in by St. George City. St. George and Washington almost got into a lawsuit at that point because that really was kind of Washington territory that St. George had kind of and picked up. And so they put together.
For them to give it up from the ridge and think, okay, well, this is, we had it here.
Whatever.
I could see the fight.
There was a fight. There was a big fight.
Man, I wish I was here for that one.
Senator at the time, Urquhart had written a bill that allowed St. George to kind of proactively annex it.
Whew.
They got it. The cities, both sides, kind of had a meltdown over it. And so they put together a boundary commission, and that boundary commission worked with all the cities, and they kind of went and drew boundaries and said, this is our area. You stay out of it. Do this. And as the airport has been kind of getting built up, there was 832 acres out there that was within Washington City's boundary, but wasn't within Washington City's annexation at that point. Mm-hmm. And I could kind of see the writing on the wall to where as this starts getting more and more valuable, St. George is going to try and, or the owners are going to try and annex into St. George rather than Washington. So I went and took some of that money that I had set in a savings account from my time on the council, and I hired an engineer, and I went and put all the exhibits together, and I went and met with all the landowners, and I put together the annexation that brought that 832 acres into Washington City, so that now that Washington City staff could start looking towards that as a long-term, how do we develop our infrastructure? Because you understand, if it's not in the annexation, the city really can't provide resources into the long-term planning for it.
Right.
And so I ran that annexation. It was, I think, 2019, maybe it was the last year I was on the council, got that through. And now here last year, Mayor Staley announced a large industrial complex that's going to be going in out there.
Freeport?
Yeah, I believe
Freeport?
that's the name of it. Freeport, yeah. And so, had I not done that, who knows? Would that be in Washington City? Potentially not, right? Because, but now those properties and that property value is going to benefit Washington City's infrastructure. For a long jobs time. Are going to be within Washington City.
Yeah.
And so, that's one of the things that I kind of did that really didn't get maybe noticed much, but I'm pretty proud of the fact that I was able to get that annexation.
Yeah.
Done.
Somebody's got to set the table up. Somebody's got to, and really, you would hope that that's what the city is there for, the city to have that foresight down the road. So, but
they have the boundary commission, but the city's not in the business of actively annexing properties. I don't think any city should be. The property owners need to say at whatever point in time comes, I want to be within Washington City, or I want to be, part of the city services, because, even today, you still got cattle out there, right? Yeah. Till it does get developed, that landowner can sit there and say, hey, I'm fine being in the county. I don't have to deal with a city board or city council until I want to be.
Right.
Fortunately, I was able to have that conversation, and they all said, yeah, let's do it and run it. And one was a firefighter group out of Louisiana.
You had to put some work in.
The state trust was one. There's dozens and dozens of owners. Fortunately, I was able to deal with a representative for several of the properties that represented these dozens of owners. But there was some legwork to do. Multiple trips to Vegas.
This is this that you bring up. I think it's important because as a real estate agent, I'm a real estate agent, mm-hmm. right? And thinking about, and I asked Craig MacArthur when he was running, hey, how do you feel about conflict of interest with being a developer? Mayor Hart in Ivins, he's a developer builder, and you get this narrative a lot of times from local citizens that are, basically saying, hey, they're just selling out to developers for the highest dollar, and all they're trying to do, they're these greedy developers, right? You have this right. banner, right? And I'm like, there's no way it's not that simple, right?
Well, and that's I caught heat for that 4 years ago, right? That's the straw argument. He's the developer, so it's a conflict of interest for him to even be on the council.
But then thinking like just taking what you did out there in Washington and say, okay, the city went as far as they're going to go, mm-hmm. but because of the experience you had in the city, being able to be actively engaged and involved in the community, be able to look down the road and say, hey, it's not necessarily that we want to just grow for growth's sake, but at some level, we have to be thinking down the road. And so you were able to piece all those things together and then have the experience and the knowledge to go put a coalition of people together that would have otherwise never come together.
Well, I think you got two issues with the conflict of interest in that whole argument, right? One is from a developer's perspective and a city's long-term growth perspective. I'm constantly out looking at market trends and market changes and what's happening in residential, what's happening in commercial. And I've been doing it for 23 years and my dad's been, or 22 years, and my dad's been doing it for 35, almost 40 years, right? Yeah. Do you want somebody having a seat at the table on the council that's doing that long-term, looking for what's coming up?
And also seeing the problems in the past.
And seeing the problems in the past and seeing what's coming in the future. Do you want a developer having some of that experience on the council, or do you want on the job training for people that don't have that experience? Right, as a city grows. I think in my mind, I think it's beneficial. But but I've said this a lot too when people say, well, geez, Belliston, isn't that a conflict of interest? And my first response is, well, you show me a person that doesn't have a conflict of interest, and I'll show you somebody that's not invested in their community.
Yeah.
Right? We all do.
That's a good point.
Every one of us does.
Yeah.
I've picked on the mayor a little bit in Washington. He's got family members that come before the council. He's got clients that come before the council.
It's still
he's
a small
got family
town.
members that
It's
work
still a small
at the
town.
city. I don't begrudge him for that. He's
Yeah.
invested in his community,
Yeah.
and I'm okay with that. But to say, well, it may be a conflict of interest, that's not the disqualifier. The disqualifier is, what do you do with it?
Yeah.
Right? Have I, as a council member, brought my own items forward and voted on my own items, or pushed those through? And I'm sorry, I just haven't.
Yeah.
Every time something came
Or
up,
are
that
you getting
affected
in the
me,
way? Are you getting in the way of others based off of your influence and things like
absolutely
that?
not.
But even then, there's processes to
there are so
to say if you had done that, there's a reason why we have laws and processes to make sure that if that is happening, they get that thing gets.
Well, that's what
exposed.
elections are for too, right?
It's what elections are for. Exactly.
If somebody's not acting properly, hey, don't reelect them.
Right.
But in my case, as a private developer,
Mm-hmm.
I would be calling the council members up saying, hey, this is why my project makes sense for you to vote on, and try to have that
influence on it.
that conversation outside of the noise of a political
environment
umbrella or environment. When I was on the council, I didn't. And you can ask any of the other council members I served with, I did not pressure them on anything that affected me. And quite frankly, I think there was only 2 or 3 things that even came up in the whole 4 years that mattered. But I didn't have that conversation with them. I recused myself. I not only didn't recuse myself from the conversation, I'd step off the council. I'd sit in the audience and if at all possible, have somebody else present for me. Right. So, I mean, you can only recuse yourself so far. You can only notice it and say, hey, I have this conflict. State statute at the Capitol, our legislators, even if they have a conflict of interest, are compelled to vote on items that benefit them.
Yeah.
Right. Financially or otherwise. City council level, fortunately, we don't have that same obligation, and I was able to recuse myself. And moving forward, I would do it in the future. My attitude was always, if it's a good project, it's going to get through whether I have 4 votes or 5 votes.
Yeah.
And so, I'm content with my actions before and moving forward if that were to ever come up.
I also would. I just want to kind of. I give. There's a valid argument to be said that there are developers that are in it for the almighty dollar, that they're in it to make as much money as they possibly can, and with not as much regard for the long-term value. However, that is the minority. I don't believe that it's the majority, especially here in Southern Utah. I think it is 100% true in larger metropolitan areas, because you don't see people face to face. You don't have this this ability to I just emailed you out of the blue and you came out. We've never even met before, right? I think this is
this is the first morning we've met.
We've never even talked before, right? Yeah. But your willingness to come in here and have a good conversation, I've found that with every single member of the local government, across the board. Okay, not every single one, but pretty much all of them, right?
So certainly, are there bad actors?
There's
Absolutely.
bad actors.
Do I, even at the state level in Utah, do I foresee, a bunch of our legislators that are there because they know they have projects coming up and they're going to need to write a bill to be able to get their project through or whatever? I don't. Do I think that you have people at the state level, local level, wherever, that have done fairly well for themselves and have an interest in seeing their industry represented in different levels of government? Sure. Mm-hmm. I think that it's important for my industry to have a seat at the table to say, in Southern Utah, construction and development is 1/3 of our economy.
It's big.
Right? And so we ought to have somebody on each of the councils that has some construction development experience, just to say, hey guys, do you know what you're doing to 1/3 of our economy by the decision you're making?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't wouldn't apologize for that if
I think it's important that
people out there,
but there's also why there's 5 of them.
Sure,
not just,
absolutely,
and they're not all developers. And this is representative democracy, right? We just talked about that, right? Is like we're representing the city council should represent the constituents that they are overseeing, and development and construction is a large piece of that for our entire county. And so no, I appreciate you being open to talking about it. Not that I necessarily wanted to hit that directly.
That's fine. I don't think I've never tried to hide it.
Yeah, right.
I've never tried to hide it, but it's tough to have the conversation when it's a straw argument, coming across a keyboard on social media that this guy's just in it for his own bottom line, and
they can connect
be further
pieces
from the truth, but you can believe what you want.
The keyboard warriors, they're so good at connecting things that don't exist too. Where you're like, just because of this over here, and you see this over here, there must be a connection there, and it's so infuriating me. But this is why I want to have longer form conversations, right? And get that perspective. Looking past 4 years,
right?
Where do you feel like on the last thing I'll just say, I'm curious your perspective on economic development, what do you think we should focus on? Where do you think that we should try to, if you look at the sectors within Washington County, construction being such a large percentage, we have healthcare, we have government, like those are the big 3 sectors that we're in right now.
I think the big 3 sectors, I certainly hope government's not part of that.
It's it's one of the largest employers.
I know, but
government owned or government positions is the 3rd largest percentage of our employment in the county. That's reality.
It may be. I just hope it's not an economic driver in our county, right? I don't
want it
really
to be.
Medical development, tourism certainly are the 3 biggest in my mind in the community. Quality of life is a big deal, which is why development is a big deal. I mean, my I guess apprehension whenever the argument comes up that says, hey, we're getting too big, was, well, when should we have shut the door? Right? Yeah. Because the day that we shut the door is the day I start exporting my kids. I brought that up earlier with water. I'm not ready to export my kids. And I value the relationships of the people that I've met that have moved here, right? And so I hope that we're able to grow responsibly, grow in a measured manner. Because I think it is such a great community. But yeah, I mean, those really are the big 3 for me, on what the community is. But
do you think manufacturing, do you think, looking at industry, thinking about Freeport and some of those things, do you think there's some?
I think there's some opportunity there. I think it hasn't been something that we've been largely focused on or really has been able to take much foothold in the community. But certainly, I think there's good opportunity. I'd like to see manufacturing come back.
From the data that I've been looking at, is a manufacturing job. It's typically a 4 to 1. So for every 1 manufacturing job, you employ 4 others in the residual stuff that they end up consuming within the local economy.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that, but I think that there's, all growing up for me was go to college, become a professional attorney, doctor, something like that. And, we need working class folks that are, hey, plumbers make some pretty good money. I know a lot of framers make some pretty good money. I know guys that know how to work with their hands that can make some pretty good money. Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity out there that I think we're missing. And so manufacturing would be great to see more of that. Made in America's good stuff. I know there's a few entities that are looking at this because we've created the opportunity here in Southern Utah, and I welcome that.
Yeah. Sweet.
Right.
Anything you want to leave everybody else with? Because I think we're at an hour here, man. So
we're at an hour. We might actually. We're a little over an hour.
We're a little over. So what do you want to leave everybody with? Obviously, get out the vote November 21st.
That's the
your
biggest
ballots
thing.
In the mail.
I would,
Troy Belliston.
If we could have 100% vote return, I'd be thrilled.
Yeah, hear from everybody.
You don't ever get that, and so and especially in an off year because it's not a mayor year and it's certainly not a federal year. This is an
it's an
council
one.
year. Just vote. Get out and vote. Talk to your neighbors, have them vote, encourage them. Even if you don't vote for me, right? If I don't make it through, that's okay, because the community, I guess the voter won, if I could sum it up. The voter wins at the end of it. Any of your elected officials, we're all sacrificial lambs. At some point, our day is done, and the voter gets to determine the best path forward based on the people that they elect to represent.
Yeah.
Right. So get out and vote.
Get out and vote. Good luck, man.
So I appreciate it.
I
appreciate you giving me an opportunity to come on and
it's good, man.
and have the conversation and meet you and see what you're doing. And
thanks, man.
And getting it out there, and appreciate your involvement or your willingness to be involved with, local elections and politics.
It needs to go from the bottom up. It has to stop going from the top down. We need to make the municipal elections the on election, and then the presidential, that's the off election. Like this, the importance level at the city elections is massive, because the influence does go up.
Yeah,
right.
There's too few people that are engaged and involved, and really the local elections most directly affect you and I and our families.
That's where the rubber hits the road.
Where we live.
Yep.
Right.
And then those representatives can go take the message to the state level, and the state ones can go take it to the federal level.
And let the dysfunction stay in D.C. or Salt Lake City.
Let the local voices
and let us
help
govern
us
ourselves
stop the dysfunction.
And get the heck out of our business.
Get the heck out of our business. Agreed. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate it.